The plasma bolt seared past Cadet Marcus Voss's helmet, close enough to fog his visor with superheated metal vapor. He pressed himself against the bulkhead of the Terran Alliance training vessel, Meridian, feeling the vibrations of enemy fire chewing through the hull plating 3 decks below. Contact confirmed, he whispered into his comm unit, watching the crimson targeting dots multiply across his HUD. 12 no. 15 Vorthok assault craft, they're boarding us. Static crackled back. The communications ray had been the first casualty when the alien raiders dropped out of hyperspace 20 minutes ago. Their ships materializing around the Meridian like predators surrounding wounded prey. Marcus had been in the middle of a routine navigation exam when the attack began, transforming what should have been another tedious day of Academy training into a nightmare. The Vorthok weren't supposed to be this far into Alliance space. Intelligence reports placed their raiding fleets at least 50 light-years away, terrorizing outer colonies and cargo haulers. But here they were, their chitinous forms skittering through the corridors of humanity's most advanced training facility, hunting down to 130 cadets like vermin. Marcus checked his sidearm, a standard issue pulse pistol, with maybe 40 shots remaining. Around him, emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red, and the ship's automated systems chanted damage reports in that maddeningly calm voice. All military is seemed to share. Hull breach on Deck 7. Atmospheric pressure dropping. All personnel evacuate to secure areas. Secure areas. Marcus almost laughed. The Vorthok had been breaching secure areas for the past hour, their acid spitters dissolving blast doors. Like tissue paper, he'd watched through security feeds as his fellow cadets tried to make stands in the armory, the mess hall, even the medical bay. The aliens showed no mercy, cutting down anyone they encountered with methodical precision. The worst part wasn't the killing, it was what came after. Marcus had seen the footage from the outer colonies, the reports that made even hardened Alliance Marines go pale. The Vorthok didn't just raid for resources, they collected specimens, living specimens. A new sound echoed through the corridor, the distinctive scraping of Vorthok movement carapaces against metal. Marcus counted at least 6 sets of footsteps, moving with the coordinated precision that made these creatures such effective predators. They were getting closer. His training kicked in. Muscle memory from thousands of hours in combat simulators. Find cover, assess threats, establish fields of fire, survive long enough for rescue to arrive. Except rescue wasn't coming. The Meridian's distress beacon had been destroyed along with the communications ray, and they were conducting training exercises in an empty sector of space, light years from the nearest patrol route. The Academy had chosen this location specifically for its isolation, no distractions, no possibility of outside interference with the training regimen. Now that isolation was killing them, Marcus heard the soft hiss of an airlock cycling, followed by the wet clicking sounds that Vorthok made when they communicated. His universal translator had been damaged in the initial attack, but he didn't need technology to understand the tone. They were coordinating, planning, preparing to flush out the remaining humans like rats from a sinking ship. He thought about his classmate Spetra Kowalski from the engineering track, probably dead in the reactor room where she'd been studying. David Chen from navigation, last seen trying to reach the bridge. Sarah Martinez from tactical, who'd scored higher than anyone in their class on combat simulations, but had never faced real enemies who bled acid and moved like nightmares. The scratching sounds were getting closer. Marcus adjusted his grip on the pulse pistol and tried not to think about the footage from Kepler Station, where Alliance investigators had found the facility intact but completely empty, with only organic residue staining the walls to show that 3,000 people had once lived there. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't go quietly. The first Vorthok rounded the corner with its weapon already raised, compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like black mirrors. Marcus didn't hesitate. 3 rapid pulse shots center mass, the energy bolts punching through the creature's natural armor in bursts of superheated chitin. An ICHOR. It screamed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with dying machinery, and stumbled backward into its companions. Marcus was already moving, rolling to new cover as return fire sizzled through the air where he'd been crouching. Vorthok weapons fired some kind of crystalline projectile that exploded on impact, sending razor-sharp fragments in all directions. 2 more aliens pushed past their wounded comrade, their four-armed forms moving with disturbing grace. Marcus caught one in the shoulder, spinning it around. But the second one was faster than his targeting computer had predicted. Its shot caught him in the chest, the crystalline shard punching through his training armor like it was made of paper. Pain exploded through his torso as the fragment lodged itself just below his left lung. He could taste blood, feel it running down inside his suit, but somehow he was still alive, still moving. He put 2 more shots into the Vorthok that had tagged him. Watching it collapse in a heap of twitching limbs, the wounded alien was trying to flank him, using its natural wall-climbing ability to scramble across the ceiling like some massive spider. Marcus tracked it with his pistol, waiting for a clear shot, when something heavy slammed into his back and sent him sprawling. Another Vorthok, this one bigger than the others, had dropped from a ventilation grate directly above him. Before Marcus could bring his weapon around, the creature's primary arms seized his wrists while its secondary limbs went for his throat. Up close, he could see every detail of its alien features, the mandibles that clicked and ground together, the cluster of sensory organs around its mouth, the acidic saliva that hissed and bubbled where it touched his armor. Marcus drove his knee upward, catching the creature in what he hoped was a vulnerable spot. The impact sent them both crashing into the bulkhead, but the Vorthok's grip didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened, and Marcus felt the bones in his wrists grinding together under the pressure. He could hear more of them coming, the scraping, clicking sounds of a full hunting pack moving through the corridors. This wasn't just a scouting probe anymore. They'd found him, and now they were converging for the kill. The creature above him made that wet clicking sound again, and this time Marcus's damaged translator caught a few words: specimen, intact, breeding potential. Something cold and primitive surged through Marcus's nervous system, older than civilization, older than the Academy, older than humanity's reach for the stars. They wanted to take him alive. They wanted to drag him back to their ships, to their laboratories, to add him to whatever collection of horrors they'd assembled from 100 dead worlds. Not happening. Marcus relaxed his struggles, letting the Vorthok think it had won, then drove his forehead forward in a savage headbutt that cracked the creature's compound eyes. Acidic fluid sprayed across his visor, but he ignored the burning sensation and grabbed for his combat knife, a simple piece of carbon steel that had belonged to his grandfather, a Marine who'd fought in the Centauri Wars. The blade punched through the softer chitin at the creature's throat, and suddenly Marcus was covered in alien blood that ate through his armor like concentrated acid. The Vorthok released him and staggered backward. Both primary arms clutched to its neck, making sounds that might have been words or might have been dying. Marcus rolled to his feet, ignoring the fire in his chest and the spreading chemical burns on his arms. His pulse pistol was gone, lost somewhere in the struggle, but he still had the knife and a few grenades on his belt, and now he could hear them coming, not just a few stragglers, but dozens of them, their movements creating a sound like rain on metal. He looked down the corridor toward the reactor section, calculating distances and blast radii. The Meridian wasn't just a training vessel, it was a testbed for experimental technology, including a prototype fusion reactor that could power a small city. If he could reach the control room, maybe he could overload the containment system, take out the whole ship and every Vorthok on it. It would mean dying, but at least it would mean dying human. The first of the new wave rounded the corner just as Marcus pulled the pin on his first grenade. The explosion lit up the corridor like a miniature sun, and in the brief moment of illumination, he could see exactly how many enemies were hunting him. Too many to count, too many to fight, but maybe, just maybe, enough to make his death worthwhile. He started running toward the reactor room. The grenade blast had bought Marcus maybe 30 seconds, but the Vorthok were already regrouping, their overlapping cries creating a sound like metal being torn apart. He sprinted through the corridors of the Meridian, his boots splashing through pools of coolant that had leaked from damaged systems. Every breath sent lightning through his punctured lung, and the acid burns on his arms were eating deeper into his flesh with each passing moment. Behind him, the hunting pack spread out through the ship's passages with military precision. These weren't mindless raiders, they were coordinated, experienced, adapting their tactics as they learned the layout of human architecture. Marcus could hear them sealing off alternative routes, cutting him off from the escape pods, hurting him exactly where they wanted him to go. But they'd made one critical mistake. They assumed he was trying to escape. The reactor section appeared ahead, its reinforced blast doors sealed, but not locked. Marcus's cadet access codes still worked. apparently small mercies in a universe that seemed determined to kill him. In the most horrifying way possible, he stumbled into the control room, sealing the entrance behind him, and immediately began pulling up the reactor's operational parameters. The Meridian's power plant was a thing of beauty, a perfect fusion of human engineering and captured alien technology. The containment field alone generated enough electromagnetic force to crush a battleship, while the fuel pellets burned at temperatures that would make a star jealous. In normal operation, 17 different safety systems prevented anything from going wrong. Marcus began shutting down those safety systems one by one. The first Vorthok reached the blast door and began working on it with some kind of molecular cutter, the metal glowing cherry red as it slowly gave way. Marcus ignored them and focused on his work, overriding lockouts and bypassing fail-safes with the desperate efficiency of a man who had nothing left to lose. Core temperature rising, containment field fluctuating, automatic shutdown procedures disabled. He just triggered the magnetic bottle collapse when the blast door finally gave way. 3 Vorthok poured through the opening, their weapons already tracking toward him. But Marcus was faster. His second grenade landed right in the middle of their formation, the explosion filling the control room with smoke and shrapnel. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the aliens were down and the third was missing most of its left side. But it was still moving, still trying to bring its weapon to bear, still determined to complete its mission. Marcus drew his grandfather's knife and went to meet it. The fight was brief and savage. The wounded Vorthok was stronger than him, faster than him, and had weapons designed specifically for killing humans. But Marcus had something it didn't understand: the absolute certainty that he was already dead, and the freedom that came with that knowledge. He took the creature's first shot in the shoulder, felt the crystalline fragment shatter his collarbone, and kept moving. Its second shot missed by inches as he rolled under its guard and drove the carbon steel blade up through the soft tissue beneath its mandibles. Alien blood poured over his hands, eating through his gloves like liquid fire. But he held on until the creature stopped twitching. The reactor's warning systems were screaming now, automated voices announcing containment failure in 17 different languages. Marcus looked at the readouts and realized he'd done it in maybe 10 minutes. The magnetic bottle would collapse completely, and the resulting explosion would vaporize everything within a 3-kilometer radius. More Vorthok were pouring into the reactor section, their voices creating a harmony of rage and frustration. They'd figured out what he was doing, and they were desperate to stop him. Some of them were working frantically at auxiliary control stations, trying to restore the safety systems he'd disabled. Others were advancing on his position with weapons ready, apparently willing to risk damage to their precious specimen if it meant preventing a reactor breach. Marcus checked his remaining grenades to left-hand calculated angles of attack. The reactor core itself was a massive cylinder in the center of the chamber, surrounded by cooling systems and control mechanisms. If he could reach it, maybe he could do more than just trigger an overload. Maybe he could turn the Meridian into something the Vorthok would remember, assuming any of them survived to remember anything. He pulled the pins on both grenades simultaneously and threw them in different directions, creating maximum chaos as the explosions lit up the reactor chamber. In the confusion, he sprinted toward the core housing, dodging weapons fire and leaping over the bodies of dead aliens. The core was beautiful, a perfect sphere of contained starfire, held in place by magnetic fields that could slice a human in half just by getting too close. Warning lights flashed around its housing, and radiation detectors clicked like angry insects. Any sane person would have turned and run. Marcus reached for the manual override controls and began the final shutdown sequence. Behind him, a Vorthok voice called out something that his translator rendered as "Stop, breeding stock. You will not." The words cut off as Marcus finished entering the command codes. The containment field flickered, wavered, and began its inexorable collapse toward critical failure. 8 minutes until detonation. The Vorthok commander stood 3 meters tall, its carapace scarred from a dozen battles across a dozen worlds. When it spoke, every other alien in the reactor chamber froze, and Marcus's failing translator managed to catch most of the words. Disable the human, carefully. We need its brain intact for interrogation. Marcus laughed, a sound that came out, wet and bubbling from his punctured lung. Too late for that, bug. You've got maybe 7 minutes before this whole section turns into a small sun. The commander's compound eyes fixed on him with predatory focus. Human engineering, crude but Effective. We will simply restore your safety systems and repair the damage you have caused. Good luck with that. Marcus gestured toward the control stations, where several Vorthic technicians were working frantically to access the reactor's operating systems. I didn't just shut down the fail-safes. I corrupted the core programming and introduced recursive feedback loops into the magnetic field generators. Even if you could crack the encryption, which you can't, you'd need about 40 minutes to untangle the mess I made. The commander made a sound like grinding metal. Then we will remove you from this vessel and allow it to destroy itself. Also not happening. Marcus pulled out his grandfather's knife, its blade still wet with alien blood. See, I've got this theory about your species. You're raiders, not warriors. You pick on easy targets. Civilian colonies, training ships full of cadets. You've never faced humans who were ready for you. Two of the smaller Vorthok rushed him from different angles, moving with coordinated precision. Marcus sidestepped the first one's weapon thrust and opened its throat with a backhand slash, then caught the second one's arm and broke it at what passed for an elbow. Both creatures fell back, leaking acidic blood that hissed and bubbled on the deck plating. Impressive, the commander said, but ultimately futile. You are one damaged human facing 12 of my warriors. The mathematics are not favorable. Marcus wiped his grandfather's knife clean on his torn uniform. Maybe, but see, there's something you don't understand about humans. We don't do mathematics when we're angry. We do poetry. He moved before the alien could respond, diving toward the reactor core housing with his knife extended, not to attack the Vorthok, that would have been suicide, but to damage the cooling systems. That kept the magnetic containment stable. The first coolant line parted under his blade in a spray of superheated vapor. The second one was harder to reach, but Marcus managed to sever it just as weapons fire began chewing up the deck around him. Alarm klaxons added their voice to the growing symphony of system failures. 5 minutes until core breach. The Vorthok were no longer trying to preserve him intact. Energy blasts and crystalline projectiles filled the air around the reactor housing, and Marcus felt something punch through his right thigh. Then something else tear a strip of flesh from his ribs. But he kept moving, kept cutting, systematically, destroying every piece of equipment he could reach. The reactor's magnetic bottle began to flutter visibly, creating electromagnetic pulses that interfered with the Vorthok weapons. Several of the aliens fell back, their equipment sparking and failing, but others pressed forward with primitive slug throwers and blade weapons. Marcus caught one of them in the chest with his knife, then spun to face another that was climbing down from the chamber's upper level. This one was different, smaller, faster, with modifications that looked more like cybernetic implants than natural evolution. It hit him like a missile, driving him back against the reactor housing, and suddenly they were grappling hand to hand. In the space between the containment field and certain death, the alien was stronger, but Marcus had learned something important in the past hour. Desperation made humans dangerous in ways that no other species seemed to understand. He caught one of the creature's secondary arms and twisted until something snapped, then drove his knee into its thorax with enough force to crack chitin. But there were too many of them, and his strength was fading along with his blood. A crystalline shard caught him in the back, lodging itself between his shoulder blades. Another one opened a line of fire across his scalp, and suddenly he was blind in one eye and struggling to stay upright. 3 minutes until core breach. The Vorthok commander appeared beside him, moving with surprising speed for something so large. Enough. We will extract what information we can from your remains and accept the loss of this vessel. It reached for him with all four arms, intending to crush him quickly and efficiently. Marcus let it grab him, then triggered the final surprise he'd been saving, a microfusion charge from his demolitions kit, rigged with a 10-second timer and taped to his chest like a suicide vest. Here's some human mathematics for you, he said, and smiled as the alien's eyes widened in what might have been understanding. The explosion wasn't large by military standards, but in the confined space of the reactor chamber, it was enough to send every Vorthok flying and turn the commander into scattered pieces of burning chitin. Marcus felt himself thrown backward through the safety barriers, directly toward the reactor core's containment field. He should have been sliced apart instantly by magnetic forces that could cut through battleship armor. Instead, something impossible happened. The field recognized him as human and adapted. The containment field didn't kill Marcus, it embraced Energy that should have sliced him into constituent atoms instead flowed through his nervous system like liquid lightning, rewriting his biology at the molecular level. The alien fragments lodged in his body were consumed and converted, their crystalline structure becoming part of him. The acid burns on his arms sealed themselves with skin that gleamed like polished metal. He could feel the reactor's heartbeat, the precise rhythm of fusion fire contained within magnetic walls. And more than that, he could control it. The surviving Vorthik stared in horror as Marcus rose from the wreckage of the safety barriers, his body crackling with electromagnetic discharge. The reactor core pulsed behind him like a captive star, its light turning his shadow into something that stretched across the entire chamber. "Impossible," one of the aliens whispered. "Humans cannot interface with magnetic containment systems." Marcus flexed his fingers and watched arcs of energy dance between them. "Humans can't do lots of things. We do them anyway." The first wave of reinforcements came through the breached blast door. 8 Vorthik warriors, armed with heavy weapons designed to punch through starship hulls. Marcus gestured casually in their direction, and the chamber's electromagnetic field responded, creating a focused pulse that turned their equipment into molten slag and sent them flying backward into the corridor. But there were more coming, a lot more. The Meridian's internal sensors showed Vorthik throughout the ship and the corridors, in the hangars, in what remained of the crew quarters. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all converging on the reactor section with the desperate fury of predators who'd discovered their prey could bite back. Marcus touched the reactor core's housing and felt its power flow through him like a river of fire. The containment field expanded outward, reshaping itself according to his will. And suddenly he wasn't just standing next to the reactor, he was part of it, a human-shaped extension of forces that could light up solar systems. The second wave hit harder than the first. These Vorthik were veterans, equipped with weapons that used magnetic fields to accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Their shots should have punched through anything human technology could produce. Instead, the projectiles slowed, stopped, and hung suspended in the air around Marcus like metallic insects caught in amber. He studied them for a moment, learning their composition and purpose, then sent them back at twice their original velocity. The results were spectacular. Vorthik warriors, who'd survived battles across a dozen star systems, were reduced to component atoms in microseconds, but their deaths only seemed to enrage the others. And the attacks kept coming, wave after wave of aliens pouring into the reactor chamber, with the single-minded determination of a species that had never learned to retreat. Marcus met them with the fury of a star-gone nova. Electromagnetic pulses turned their weapons into scrap metal. Focused gravity fields crushed them against the bulkheads. When they tried to use explosives, he absorbed the energy and redirected it back at them in streams of coherent plasma. But there were so many of them, and they were learning from each failed assault. The third wave came with unhardened equipment and projectile weapons that didn't rely on magnetic acceleration. The fourth wave included specialists with portable force field generators and weapons that fired some kind of exotic matter. Marcus felt something punch through his enhanced physiology, a projectile that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously and couldn't be deflected by conventional magnetic fields. It carved a channel through his torso that would have killed a normal human instantly. But instead of blood, he leaked coherent energy that reformed his wounds as quickly as they appeared. The fifth wave brought their heavy equipment portable plasma cannon that could melt through starship armor, guided missiles with warheads that generated temporary black holes, and something that looked like a handheld device for creating controlled fusion explosions. Marcus stepped directly into their fire, letting the exotic energies wash over him like warm rain. Each hit made him stronger, more connected to the reactor's infinite power supply. When the smoke cleared, he was standing in a crater that had been melted out of the deck plating, surrounded by the scattered remains of a dozen aliens who'd learned too late that you couldn't kill a living fusion reactor with conventional weapons. But the Vorthik weren't giving up. If anything, they seemed more determined than ever, their assault taking on the characteristics of a holy war. Marcus could hear their voices through the smoke and flames, their translators rendering words like abomination and unnatural and must be stopped. The sixth wave was different. Instead of trying to destroy him, they were trying to contain him, setting up a network of force field generators that would isolate him from the ship's power grid and gradually drain his energy until he collapsed back into merely human form. It might have worked, If Marcus had been willing to stay put and let them complete their preparations, instead, he reached out with his transformed consciousness and touched every power conduit in the ship simultaneously. The Meridian's entire electrical grid became an extension of his nervous system, carrying his will to every corner of the vessel. Emergency lighting blazed with the intensity of welding torches. Life support systems began generating atmospheric mixtures that were toxic to Vorthic physiology, and in the ship's remaining weapon systems, targeting computers began acquiring locks on every alien signature they could detect. The seventh wave never made it to the reactor chamber. They were caught in corridors that had become killing fields, trapped by blast doors that responded to Marcus's thoughts instead of their access codes, hunted by automated systems that had been reprogrammed to see them as hostile targets. Marcus could feel each death, each moment of alien terror and confusion as they realized their prey had become their predator. It should have horrified him, the old Marcus. The cadet who'd worried about ethics exams and graduation requirements would have been sickened by the slaughter, but the old Marcus was gone, consumed in the same transformation that had merged his consciousness with the reactor's containment field. What remained was something new, something that existed at the intersection of human will and stellar fire. And that something was very, very angry. The Vorthic commander who'd replaced the first was everything its predecessor hadn't been: cautious, methodical, and smart enough to recognize when conventional tactics had failed. Marcus could feel it through the ship's sensor grid, coordinating with the remaining aliens through quantum encrypted communications that his enhanced consciousness could monitor but not decrypt. They were planning something that involved the Meridian's hyperspace engines. Marcus expanded his awareness through the ship's systems, following power conduits and data pathways until he found what they were building. In the engineering section, a quantum resonance device, cobbled together from salvaged Vorthic equipment and components stripped from the ship's navigation array. If activated, it would create a localized spacetime disruption that would sever his connection to the reactor by literally moving him into a different dimensional framework. Clever, desperate, but clever. He began rerouting power to the ship's defensive systems, but the Vorthic were already adapting to his new capabilities. Somehow they'd learned to shield their activities from the Meridian's internal sensors, creating electromagnetic dead zones where his consciousness couldn't penetrate. They were working faster now, with the desperate efficiency of a species that had finally encountered something they couldn't simply overpower or outnumber. The quantum device came online with a sound like reality tearing at the seams. Marcus felt the edges of his expanded awareness begin to fray as the Vorthic weapon started pulling him out of phase with normal spacetime. His connection to the reactor weakened, the flow of stellar fire through his transformed body becoming sporadic and uncertain. But they'd made one critical mistake. In their rush to build the dimensional weapon, they'd used components from the Meridian's own systems, including quantum processors that Marcus had been interfacing with for the past 20 minutes. He reached through those processors with what remained of his enhanced consciousness and began rewriting the device's operational parameters. Instead of pulling him out of phase with the reactor, it would pull the reactor out of phase with the rest of the ship. The consequences would be immediate and catastrophic. The Vorthic commander must have realized what was happening, because suddenly, every alien on the ship was rushing toward the engineering section, abandoning their coordinated assault in favor of a desperate charge to protect their quantum weapon. Marcus met them in the corridors, his body still crackling with electromagnetic discharge, but he could feel his enhanced abilities fading as the dimensional disruption took hold. The fighting was savage and close range, more like a brawl in a bar than a military engagement. Marcus caught the first alien with a plasma bolt that reduced it to constituent atoms, but the second one tackled him from behind, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs and weapons. His grandfather's knife opened the creature's throat, but not before its claws raked across his chest and left for parallel furrows that leaked energy instead of blood. More Vorthic poured into the corridor, and suddenly Marcus was fighting for his life with weapons that barely functioned and abilities that flickered in and out of existence, like a bad electrical connection. A crystalline projectile caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Another one shattered against his enhanced skin, but still left him stunned and disoriented. He was losing. For the first time since his transformation, Marcus could feel defeat closing in around him like a tightening noose. The aliens were coordinating their attacks perfectly, using his own fating abilities against him, driving him away from the engineering section and toward the ship's outer hull, where his connection to the reactor would be weakest. That's when he realized what they didn't understand about humans. They thought he was trying to save himself. Marcus stopped retreating and started advancing, walking directly into the concentrated fire of 20 alien weapons. Each hit weakened him further, but he kept moving, kept pushing forward, until he reached the quantum device's control console. The Vorthic commander was there, working frantically to complete the dimensional separation before Marcus could reach the override controls. It looked up as he approached, its compound eyes reflecting the flickering light of his failing transformation. "Too late, human," it said through the universal translator. "The process cannot be stopped. You will be severed from your power source and return to your natural state. Then we will take you apart piece by piece and learn how your species achieved this impossible fusion." Marcus smiled, his teeth gleaming with traces of stellar fire. "You're right. The process can't be stopped." He reached past the alien and activated the quantum device's final sequence. Not the gradual dimensional separation the Vorthic had programmed, but an instantaneous phase shift that would move the entire reactor core into a parallel dimensional framework. But you never asked what would happen to a ship when its power source suddenly exists in a different universe. The commander's eyes widened as it finally understood. Without the reactor to maintain structural integrity, the Meridian would collapse into its component molecules in approximately 30 seconds. And since the Vorthic ships were still docked to the training vessel's hull, impossible. The alien whispered, "You cannot mean to." Marcus grabbed the creature by its primary manipulator arms and held it in place. As the quantum device completed its sequence, round them, the ship began to shake apart as fundamental forces lost their coherence. "This is for every human colony you've raided," he said, his voice carrying the authority of contained starfire. "This is for every civilian you've turned into a specimen. And this is for making the mistake of hunting cadets who weren't ready to fight back." The reactor vanished into parallel dimensions, with a sound like the universe taking a deep breath, and then physics stopped working. The Meridian died beautifully. Without the reactor's magnetic containment to maintain molecular cohesion, the ship began disintegrating from the inside out. Hull plating separated into individual atoms that drifted away like metallic snow. Corridors twisted into impossible geometries as the fundamental forces that held matter together simply stopped functioning. Even the Vorthic creatures that had evolved in the vacuum between stars screamed as their bodies began to unravel. At the quantum level, Marcus felt it all through his fading connection to the ship's systems. Every death, every moment of alien terror, every structural failure. As 200 years of human engineering collapsed into constituent particles, he should have been dying with them, his enhanced physiology failing along with everything else. Instead, something extraordinary happened. As the quantum device completed its dimensional phase shift, Marcus found himself pulled along with the reactor into the parallel framework the Vorthic had unwittingly created. One moment he was standing in the engineering section of a disintegrating starship, holding an alien commander in a grip that would outlast the heat death of the universe. The next moment he was floating in a space that existed adjacent to normal reality, connected to a fusion reactor that now burned with the combined fury of 12 alien warships. The Vorthic fleet had been docked to the Meridian when the dimensional shift occurred. As the training vessel came apart, it had taken the raiders with it, dragging them into the same parallel space where physics worked according to different rules that Marcus was learning to manipulate with increasing precision. He could see them through the quantum foam alien warriors who'd terrorized a dozen star systems, now reduced to helpless passengers in a universe they couldn't comprehend. Their weapons didn't function here. Their ships were breaking apart as exotic particles ate through their hulls. And in the center of it all, Marcus burned like a human-shaped star, feeding on energies that existed only in the spaces between realities. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Vorthic had created their own prison in their desperation to contain him. But Marcus found he wasn't interested in prolonging their suffering. These creatures had made the mistake of attacking humans who were trying to learn, to grow, to become something better than what they'd been. That was unforgivable. But it didn't require elaborate revenge. He reached out with his transformed consciousness and began collapsing the dimensional framework the aliens had created. Reality folded in on itself like origami made of spacetime. carrying the remains of the Vorthok fleet into a gravitational singularity that would compress them down to a point smaller than an atom. It took approximately 15 seconds for 12 warships and 300 alien raiders to be reduced to a footnote in physics. When it was over, Marcus found himself alone in a pocket of twisted spacetime, connected to a reactor that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. He could feel the normal universe calling to him, a gentle pull toward the reality where humans built ships and trained cadets and worried about examinations that would never matter as much as the people taking them, but returning would mean losing what he'd become. The transformation that had saved his life was inextricably linked to the dimensional phase shift. Step back into normal spacetime, and he'd become merely human again, assuming his altered physiology could survive the transition. Marcus thought about his classmates, dead in the corridors of a ship that no longer existed. He thought about the colonies the Vorthok had raided, the families they'd destroyed, the specimens they'd collected from worlds that would never see their people again. He thought about the academy instructors who'd taught him that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons, but their willingness to sacrifice everything for the people they cared about. The choice was surprisingly easy. Marcus began the process of dimensional collapse, gradually reducing the pocket universe he inhabited until it was small enough to carry with him back to normal space. The reactor came with him, its fusion fire compressed into a sphere no larger than his fist, but containing enough energy to power a civilization. The transition back to normal spacetime was agony beyond description. Every atom in his body had to be rebuilt according to the laws of conventional physics, and for several minutes Marcus existed as both human and living energy simultaneously. But when the process was complete, he found himself floating in the empty space where the Meridian had once conducted its training exercises. He was human again mostly. The reactor's energy still flowed through his veins like liquid starlight, but contained now within biological systems that could channel it without burning out. His wounds had healed, leaving only faint scars that glowed softly in the darkness. And in his chest, where the alien fragment had punctured his lung, something new had grown, a secondary heart that beat in perfect synchronization with the compressed fusion reactor he carried. 3 hours later, the Alliance patrol ship Defiant found him drifting in the debris field that had once been 12 Vorthok warships. The rescue team's report would become classified immediately, then buried so deep in military archives that most people would never know it existed. But certain details would leak out, as they always did. A training vessel attacked by Vorthok raiders, 230 cadets, all presumed dead. One survivor found floating in space with no environmental suit, no life support, and no apparent explanation for how he'd survived in vacuum. For over 4 hours, the survivor's debriefing was conducted by Alliance intelligence at a facility that officially didn't exist. Marcus told them everything: the attack, the transformation, the dimensional shift that had destroyed an entire alien fleet. He showed them the compressed reactor he carried, demonstrated his ability to interface with magnetic containment systems, and submitted to every test they could devise. Most of them didn't believe him. The few who did were quietly reassigned to projects that would keep them busy for the next several decades. 6 months later, Cadet Marcus Voss graduated from the Alliance Academy with honors and a commendation for exceptional performance under adverse conditions. His classmates had been memorialized in a ceremony that drew representatives from across human space, their names carved into a monument that would stand for 1,000 years. Marcus requested assignment to the Frontier Patrol, tracking Vorthok raiders in the outer systems. His superiors were happy to comply. It kept him away from populated areas where questions might be asked about his unusual capabilities. The first raider ship he encountered surrendered without firing a shot. Word had spread through the Vorthok fleet networks about the human who'd destroyed an entire attack force with his bare hands. The aliens had developed what their xenobiologists called Voss syndrome, a species-wide phobia triggered by encountering lone humans in military uniforms. Marcus found he didn't mind being a ghost story that alien children told to frighten each other in the dark. It meant fewer human colonies would be attacked, fewer families would be torn apart, fewer people would disappear into the nightmare laboratories where the Vorthok conducted their research. 10 years later, he was promoted to captain and given command of his own ship, the Meridian II, built with technology reverse-engineered from the reactor core he'd brought back from a Parallel dimension. It was faster than anything in the Alliance fleet, powered by fusion fire that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and equipped with weapons that could punch holes through spacetime itself. The Vorthok learned to avoid any system where the Meridian II was stationed. 20 years later, Marcus was offered a position at the Academy, training the next generation of cadets who might someday face impossible odds against alien enemies. He accepted, partly because he wanted to pass on what he'd learned, and partly because he'd never forgotten the sound of his classmates dying in corridors that no longer existed. His first lecture was always the same. "My name is Captain Marcus Voss," he would tell each new group of wide-eyed cadets. "I'm going to teach you how to survive when the universe tries to kill you. Some of you think this is about tactics or technology or following the proper procedures under fire." He would pause here, letting his eyes skim the classroom, noting which students were really listening and which ones thought they already knew everything they needed to know. "You're wrong. Survival isn't about any of those things. Survival is about understanding what you're willing to sacrifice and what you absolutely refuse to lose. Everything else is just details." Then he would begin the real lesson, not about weapons or ship operations or military protocol, but about the thing that made humans dangerous. When they had nothing left to lose, the thing that had turned a cadet with a punctured lung and a combat knife into something that could rip the heart out of a star with his bare hands. The thing that alien species across the galaxy had learned to fear more than black holes or supernovas or the heat death of the universe itself. The thing called human stubbornness, refined into an art form and weaponized by 200,000 years of evolutionary pressure. Some of his students would understand. Most wouldn't. Not until they found themselves alone in the dark with enemies who thought humans were just another species to be cataloged and harvested. But when that moment came, and Marcus knew it would come, because the universe was vast and hostile and full of creatures that saw humanity as nothing more than interesting specimens, they would remember his words, and they would refuse to go quietly, because that, ultimately, was what made humans human. Not their technology, not their weapons, not their ships or their colonies or their dreams of touching the stars, their absolute, bloody-minded refusal to be prey. Marcus smiled as he watched his latest class of cadets file out of the lecture hall, already arguing among themselves about what they'd just heard. Most of them would never face the kind of situation he'd survived. Most of them would have long, successful careers protecting human space from threats that could be handled with conventional tactics and standard issue equipment. But somewhere among them was another Marcus Voss, someone who would find themselves alone against impossible odds, with nothing but a knife and the determination to make their death mean something. When that day came, humanity would survive, because that's what humans did.